It's that time again, time to read another audiobook. This time we're reading Step Closer, which, if you ask me, is a very foreboding title. And with how the last book ended off, I'm really excited to see how this one goes. The first story, obviously, is called Step Closer as well, and let's start it right now. Foxy's yellow eyes glowed in the darkness of the room. His jaw hung open, flashing sharp teeth. Foxy lifted his hook and slashed its sharp tip in front of Pete's face, the hook whizzing by his nose. Pete rolled off his bed, his body shaking. His stomach pitched as he lay helpless on the floor, and Foxy pivoted, looming over him. The shifting of gears filled the room as Foxy swung up with his hook. "You can be a pirate, but first you'll have to lose an eye and an arm." "No," Pete breathed. When Foxy slammed his hook down into Pete's eye, an audible pop sounded. Blood poured from his eye socket as Pete screamed. Freddy Fazbear's pizza was crowded with crazy little kids and their harassed idiot parents. Music bellowed through wall speakers and arcade games pinged and vibrated. The scent of burnt pepperoni wafted through the air, mixed with the scent of cotton candy. Pete was slouched against a wall, ankles crossed and ball cap turned backward, drinking a cherry-flavored cola while chewing watermelon gum. His little brother and his friends were crowded around an arcade game. Pete didn't want to be there, but his mother had to work and Chuck had to be with his friends after school again. So that left Pete to play babysitter. For the 100th time, he asked himself, why was it always his job? And was the little snot grateful? Nope. Chuck was always whining about his inhaler, always whining he was hungry, always asking a bunch of questions, always something. Since their dad had left, Pete was saddled with everything Chuck. His mom's words were stuck in his head. "You're the man of the house now, Pete. Take care of your little brother." How was Pete supposed to be the man when he was just 16? Did anyone ask him what he thought of his new responsibilities? Double nope. Pete watched a little kid walk up to a couple of employees cleaning up birthday tables. He pulled on the guy's sleeve. The man looked down at the kid and smiled. "Can I help you with something?" he asked. "I was wondering, where's Foxy the pirate?" the kid asked. The man's voice was syrupy sweet. "Oh, Foxy's on vacation at the moment. We hope to have him back soon." The little kid stuck his lip out but nodded as he walked away. The other employee chuckled. "Good one," he told the man. "Yeah, on vacation in the maintenance room. Don't know when they'll bring the show out again." Pete was thinking that over when he realized someone was saying his name. "Pete?" He pulled his attention from the conversation and moved his gaze toward Maria Rodriguez, who was standing next to him. Her black hair brushed her shoulders, and her lips were glossy red. She had these bright green eyes with long lashes and a few freckles on her nose. She was a cheerleader at their high school, and he'd known her since the 6th grade. So why did he suddenly feel so nervous around her? "Hey, Maria," he said. "Stuck here with little Chucky, huh?" Pete scowled. "Yeah." "Same here. My little sister's birthday." Maria motioned to a birthday table in front of the stage, with little kids wearing cone hats and eating cake. "Can't believe we used to be like them." He smirked. "Don't know about you, but I was never like that." Maria smiled. "Sure. So, where have you been? Haven't seen you at practice lately." He'd been benched from football for unnecessary roughness and having a bad attitude on multiple occasions. Hello? This was football. So he just quit altogether. The truth was, Pete never used to quit anything. He used to finish whatever he started. But after seeing his parents quit each other, finishing things didn't matter so much anymore. Plus, he didn't need any more grief from the coach. He got enough of that from his teachers and his mom. A kid could only handle so much griping. He shrugged. "Got tired of it all, you know." "Yeah, I guess. So what are you going to do with all your free time now?" "Well..." Someone waved to Maria from the party table and her face lit up. Yes, finally time to leave. Before she left, she added, "Hey, a bunch of us are meeting under Old Beacon Bridge if you want to come to hang out later." Pete smiled. "Yeah?" She nodded. "It'll be fun." Then he shook his head. "Can't. I have to watch Chuck the Chump." "Oh, okay. Maybe next time. See you around school." Irritation washed over Pete as he watched Maria walk away. This was all Chuck's fault. Little brat. Everything was always about his little brother. Didn't matter what Pete wanted because nothing mattered when it came to Pete. Dad had left. Mom was in her own little world. They figured they'd just put Pete in charge of Chuck because they didn't have the time to deal with him themselves. But Pete had never signed up to take over their responsibilities. He was a kid, and kids should be free, not worrying about stuff. They should be able to do what they wanted, like hanging out with the other kids instead of watching little brothers. But his parents obviously didn't care about any of that. After all, they never asked Pete if he had wanted them to split up in the first place. They just divorced, and that was that. None of it was fair. Pete had so many emotions inside of him that sometimes he just didn't know what to do with them. Sometimes he felt like a ticking time bomb about to explode, like the tension in his body was just under his skin, begging for release. For a while, football had helped. He'd been a beast on the field, taking down players, throwing people out of the way. By the end of practice, he'd been exhausted and empty. Empty was better. It was good. But since he was off the team, Pete was stuck without an outlet. He hated these feelings. He hated everything sometimes. He watched his brother break off from his friends to head to the bathroom, and his eyes narrowed on the fresh opportunity. Pete tossed his soda at an empty table and walked quickly to his brother's side, latching onto his arm forcefully. Chuck's face screwed up. "Ow, Pete!" "Shut up and walk," he muttered, then blew a bubble till it popped. "Why? Where are we going?" "You'll see." With a quick look over his shoulder, Pete hustled his little brother down a long and darkened corridor. The floor was faded and old, and peeling posters of animatronics lined the walls. The place needed a serious upgrade. Pete had wandered down here before and discovered the large maintenance room. Now that he knew what he was taking a vacation inside, he couldn't wait to take Chuck along for a little adventure, considering his brother had always been scared of a certain animatronic. Chuck started to protest. "Where are we going?" "What's the matter? You scared?" "No, I just want to stay with my friends." "We're going to check something out." Chuck hiccuped and licked his dry lips around his braces. He sounded like a toad when he was nervous. "Just leave me alone or I'm telling Mom." "You're such a little snitch. Now we're really going in." Pete dragged his surprisingly strong brother through the entrance of the maintenance room to meet Foxy the pirate. The heavy door slammed behind them, engulfing them in darkness. "Pete, let me go." "Quiet, someone might hear, and I don't want to listen to you whining like a baby. Do you know how annoying that is?" Pete wouldn't let loose of the vice grip he had on his brother. No, it was time to teach Chuck a lesson. It was time for Pete to do what he wanted, and right now that meant giving his brother a good scare. Little Chuck the chump might even pee his pants. Pete chuckled at this idea. With one hand still firmly on his brother's arm, he fished his phone out of his pocket and turned on the light to guide them slowly through the darkness. The area was strangely quiet, as if it wasn't connected to a boatload of people just down a hallway. The smell here was stagnant and musty, and the air seemed lifeless, as if no one had set foot in here recently, which was weird when the rest of the building was full of activity. Hiccup? Pete's foot knocked a bottle across the floor. It hit something and shattered. Pete and Chuck froze, wondering if someone would hear, but no one seemed to be around. Pete scanned the floor with the light, revealing scuffed black and white checkered tiles. Dusty tables and a few broken chairs were scattered around the large room. There were cardboard boxes on the tables, half empty, with party hats and plates scattered around them. His light flashed on a big black spider sitting on the edge of one of the boxes. "Aw, look at that sucker, it's huge," Pete said. The spider jumped away and the boys leaped back. "I hate spiders, let's get out of here," Chuck whined again. "Not yet, there's so much more to explore. Think of it like one of those adventure games you like to play. We have to find the secret treasure," Pete said, laughing under his breath, more like he had to scare the crap out of his brother a little more. He flashed his light back down to the floor. He stopped on what looked like dark melted candles and strange black markings. "What is that? Are those symbols?" Chuck wanted to know. "Who cares?" Pete continued to wave the light around. Then he saw the small stage with the closed purple curtain, and a grin split his mouth. Pinned to the curtain there was a crooked sign with the words, "Out of service." Score! Hopefully it still works. "Pete, we shouldn't be in here. We could get in trouble. Like, big trouble. Like, trespassing, you know? That's against the law." "That's against the law," Pete mimicked him in a tiny voice. "You're such a nerd, you know that? What are you going to be when you grow up, Chuck? A cop? I'll be sure to buy you a donut on the way home." Pete shined the light next to the stage, revealing a rusted control box on a side table. The cover was broken off the box. "This is going to be good." He dragged his brother to the foot of the stage. "Enjoy the show, little brother." "Stop it, Pete." He grabbed Chuck by the shirt and pants, giving him a good wedgie as he launched him onto the little stage. Chuck crashed onto the platform with an ugh, and Pete rushed onto the control box. He slammed a palm on a button that said start. Again and then again. A low hum sounded, followed by a muffled click and clank. "Aw, come on," Pete yelled when nothing happened. Finally, the small curtain began to open. In a quick motion, Chuck rolled to the side. "Chuck, you wimp!" Pete rushed to the stage, grabbing Chuck by his sneakers to keep him there. In the quick moves only fear can bring on, Chuck managed to evade his brother. He climbed to his feet, jumped off the platform, and ran. That was the fastest Pete had ever seen his brother run. If he hadn't been running from Pete, he might even be impressed. Pete moved to get him back, then came to halt in front of the stage as his shirt caught in something. "Dang," he muttered. He tugged in his shirt, but it was caught in a stupid nail. Choppy music sounded through the air as the curtains opened fully. Pete stood frozen in front of the fractured, Foxy animatronic that was glaring down at him. The yellow eyes glowed under red brows, and an eye patch flipped up over his right eye. A jaw with sharp, pointy teeth hung loosely as the big fox began to sing a disjointed song about becoming a pirate. One arm had a hook for a hand, and the other hand was stripped of fur, showing its robotic skeleton. Strange sounds of whirling gears screeched and seemed to echo in the quiet of the room. The robot's chest appeared ripped open, exposing more of his mechanical body. Foxy moved slowly, eerily. Even though Pete knew he was a robot, his deteriorated body looked to be half eaten away by who knew what. A shiver skittered down Pete's spine. He swallowed his gum. He couldn't move away from Foxy's yellow eyes as he sang. Didn't know why, just a dumb old robot. "You can be a pirate, but first you'll have to lose an eye and an arm. Yarg! First you'll have to lose an eye and an arm. Yarg! First you'll have to lose an eye and an arm. Yarg! First you'll have to lose an eye and an arm. Yarg! First you'll have to lose an eye and an arm. Yarg!" The old animatronic was stuck on the same lyric. "First you'll have to lose an eye and an arm. Yarg!" Pete blinked as a strange feeling came over him, like an invisible, cold, heavy blanket was covering every inch of his body, then sinking through his skin and into his bones. "First you'll have to lose an eye and an arm. Yarg!" The room grew still with a sudden silence, yet Pete remained standing there in the dark, unmoving. He blinked and looked around, trying to remember where he was. He was in the dark, alone. His pulse scrambled as he stepped up. Then he saw his shirt was caught in a nail, and it all came back to him. He rubbed at his eyes, yanked his shirt from the nail, and stormed away from the stage to find his brother. "Dang it, Chuck!" Pete watched Chuck suck in a puff of his inhaler before he sat down at the dinner table. He could tell his little brother's nerves were still shot from when Pete took him to see Foxy the Pirate. Chuck eyed Pete across the table and squirmed. Pete didn't know what he was so upset about. The little brat didn't even get to see the best part of the show. He'd run away and stuck closely to his friends until it was time to come home. "How was Freddy Fazbear's pizza, boys?" their mom asked, as she set plates of ham and potatoes in front of them. "Fine," Chuck said, without looking up from his plate. "Yeah, just dandy," Pete muttered, swallowing mashed potatoes. "What, did something happen?" "No, nothing," the brothers said together. Pete gave Chuck a warning look. "Better not tell." Mom raised her eyebrows as she sat down. "Okay, well, I have something exciting to share with both of you. I thought it was time for us to do something as a family, and something that was good for the world." Pete bit back words that would likely hurt his mom's feelings. What family? It had nearly been 6 months since Dad had left and broken up their family, and when had she suddenly become a do-gooder? Something new, something that represents a fresh start for the three of us as a family unit. Something that could give someone else a fresh start, too. She pulled out a paper from a folder and turned it toward them. Pete read the bold letters in disbelief. "Organ donors?" Mom nodded in excitement. "Yes, we'll be family donors. Doesn't that sound great?" Chuck's gaze met Pete's in astonishment. "This is your exciting news. You really want us to give up our own body parts?" Pete asked her. She waved her hand at Pete. "Only if something happens to us, silly, which obviously we don't want, but if it did, we could actually help other people who are sick and in need of a new heart or a kidney. We could save someone's life. We'd be heroes." "We'd be dead heroes," Chuck said. She laughed. "Oh, Chuckles, you make me laugh." "Yeah, Chuckles, you're a riot," Pete said, deadpan. Chuck scrunched up his face. "Hey, Mom, you know what Pete did at the pizza place?" Pete narrowed his eyes at Chuck. He knew the little brat wouldn't keep his mouth shut. "What did he do?" "He drank way too much soda," Chuck smiled, flashing his railroad tracks. Mom sighed. "Pete, come on, I told you what all that soda does to your teeth." Pete just looked back at his mom. What was with her lately? Last month, she'd started to see someone who called herself a life coach. Then his mom had started yoga, chopped her long hair off, and gone on some weird juice cleanse. She'd also gathered a bunch of their stuff and given it away to "First you'll have to lose an eye and an arm. Yarg!" Charity. Now she wanted to give away their body parts? "Here, read the flyer, Pete," Mom said. "It'll convince you for sure." Pete grabbed the paper his mom shoved under his nose. The list of organ donations was pretty long. Bones, heart, kidney, liver, pancreas, skin, intestine, eyeballs. Eyeballs. First you'll have to lose an eye and an arm. Yarg! Pete flashed back to Foxy. He imagined Foxy suddenly walking off the stage and stalking toward him with his big, sharp hook. His mechanical feet scraped across the floor. Pete's mashed potatoes did a slow roll in his stomach, and he blinked. He suddenly felt lightheaded. What a dumb idea, Mom. Pete, it's not dumb, and it hurts my feelings that you think that. Yeah, Mom was into expressing her feelings lately, too. He shoved his chair away from his table and stood up as his face flashed cold, then hot. I'm not doing it, Mom. Pete, I don't want to talk about it. I'm going to bed. Pete walked out of the dining room. What happened? He heard his mom ask. Chuck sighed. Puberty. Hurry up, Pete. The next morning, Chuck banged on the bathroom door. If Pete didn't get out soon, Chuck would be late for the bus to W.H. Jameson Middle School. If he missed the bus, then he'd have to ride his bike 5 miles to school, and his mom would freak out over his going alone. She was paranoid that something would happen to him if Pete wasn't with him, which he didn't understand since he was almost 12. Well, 11 and a half. Lots of his friends were left by themselves all the time, but not Chuck. Pete always said it was because Chuck was the baby, and their mom couldn't stop thinking of him that way. He heard Pete heave into the toilet, and Chuck stepped back and cringed. Pete was sick, he figured. Chuck's lip curled a little. That's what he deserves for trying to scare me yesterday. Then he let that thought go as Pete heaved again, stepping back and leaning against the wall to wait. Chuck knew Dad's leaving had changed everyone. Pete was angry all the time, Mom kept searching for new things to make her happy. As for himself, he just tried to keep busy. He liked to hang out with his friends, he liked playing online video games, and he was pretty interested in puzzles. Yeah, middle school sucked, but going to school was just a part of life you had to get through. Every once in a while, he felt challenged by a project. Then he'd complete it and get bored again until something caught his interest. He got why Pete hated him half the time, because Mom made Pete watch over him so much. He tried not to be annoying, but everything that came out of his mouth seemed to annoy Pete. Maybe it was just like that with all brothers. Chuck didn't know because he didn't have another brother to compare to. The toilet flushed. A minute later, Pete swung open the door. A wave of serious stink wafted at Chuck, and he waved a hand in front of his nose. Pete didn't look so good. His face was so pale his freckles stood out like tiny bugs in his cheeks. His dark hair stuck up in different directions like he'd jammed his finger in a socket and shocked himself. And there were dark circles under his eyes. Geez, Pete, what's the matter with you? Nothing, Pete spat out. Something didn't agree with me, probably something from that stupid Freddy Fazbear's pizza. Chuck didn't think so. Do you want me to call Mom? Pete shoved him aside. No, I'm not a little baby like you, Chuck the chump. Chuck felt his shoulders stiffen. He hated that stupid nickname. Whatever, he mumbled. He slammed and locked the bathroom door behind him. Pete chugged an energy drink with triple caffeine while running to his bio class, but he still felt drained and exhausted. He'd had some pretty crazy dreams last night. He couldn't remember much, only that there had been all this blood. It was everywhere, pouring all over him, down his face and over his chest and arms. When he jerked awake, his blankets were tangled around his body. He'd fallen to the floor trying to unwind the blankets just so he could rush to the bathroom to blow chunks. He shivered just thinking about it, but he rolled his shoulders and shoved that not-so-fun memory away. He probably should have stayed home, but calling his mom at work would have freaked her out, and she'd be asking him a million questions. He decided just to get through with the day somehow. He loped into his classroom 5 minutes after the bell. Mr. Dinglewood, you are late, droned Mr. Watson in a bored voice. Note? Pete snatched off his hat and shook his head in a negative. He took an empty stool at the workstation in the far back, next to a kid in a black leather jacket and purple hair. Pete zipped his hat into his pack and set it on the floor, then wiped some sweat off his forehead. He shifted awkwardly on the stool. Why couldn't he seem to keep still? As I was saying, class, we'll be dissecting a frog today, said Mr. Watson. You've all been quizzed on the safety rules for the tools and the procedure. You will work as a team with your partner to fill out the lab sheets. I expect you all to be mature young people. I know this will be hard for some of you, but there's no funny business here or you'll fail. You don't want to fail. You have 30 minutes, starting now. When they both turned, the dead frog sprawled out in front of them. Leather jacket guy leaned forward. Dude, what's the matter with you? Pete shook his head. Nothing. Leather jacket guy gave him a yeah right look and picked up a small scalpel. 10 minutes in, Pete yawned. His mouth was dry and his hand was starting to shake from the precise cutting. Leather jacket guy smirked. "Hey, check this out," he said, and poked the frog in its eye with the scalpel. A weird liquid gushed out. Sick, right? Then he shoved the blade into the frog's arm and sliced it off. He picked up the tiny hand and waved it at Pete. Pete shook his head. "I need a break. Look, I'm sorry. I swear I'll stop messing around." He held out the little frog hand. "Here, let's shake on it." The kid chuckled as Pete pushed off the stool and headed for the classroom water fountain. He took a couple of drinks. Dang, he was thirsty. And he was starving. His stomach decided to growl then, since he'd skipped breakfast trying to make it to school on time. He was heading back to his workstation when Mr. Watson stopped him. "Everything going well, Mr. Dinglewood?" he asked. Mr. Watson was shorter than him, with white hair and a white mustache. Glasses hung off the tip of his red nose, as if somehow he was looking down on Pete, even though that was physically impossible. "Yep, things are fine," Pete blurted. Mr. Watson frowned. "Glad to hear it. Now please return to your dissection lab. You of all people cannot afford to fail." "That's what I'm doing," Pete muttered, whirling around. It all went downhill from there. Pete took a quick, long stride, and his foot landed on his pack strap instead of landing securely on the floor. That was when he slipped, losing his footing, falling backward. He felt his toe connect with the leather jacket guy in a brutal way. The kid yelped, and Mr. Watson shouted something in reply. Pete landed on his back, his breath knocked out of him. He blinked, and when he opened his eyes, he spotted the kid's scalpel, up in the air. The small knife must have flown up on impact. But then, in disbelief, Pete saw the scalpel lose gravity and fall toward his face, the point of the tiny blade coming straight for his eye. Adrenaline spurted through his body. With the quick reflexes that came from years of playing football, Pete swatted the tool away like a deadly insect, just as the blade was about to blind him. The scalpel hit the sand of the workstation and fell to the floor. "Holy!" Leather Jacket Guy hissed. "Dear Lord, Peter, are you all right?" said Mr. Watson, hovering over him like a frightened parent. "Don't move, I'll call the nurse. Class, stay seated. Nobody move. Emergency procedure, please. Out of the way." The class ignored Mr. Watson and crowded around Pete as his chest rose up and down with heavy breaths. He didn't think he'd hit his head, but he felt dizzy and kind of out of it. Not to mention mortified. Someone whispered, "Way to go, Dingleberry." A couple of kids giggled. Yeah, what a loser. Now we know why he was kicked off the football team. Pete slowly sat up as his face flushed red. Dang, there was no doubt he should have stayed home. Somehow, Pete managed to get through the rest of the school day. The nurse had checked him out and given him an ice pack and sent him on his way. It was a relief when the final bell rang and he walked quickly around slow-moving kids, through the doors, and down the school's front steps. When he checked his phone, he saw he had a new text from his mother. He rubbed a hand over his face. What now? Couldn't he get through one day without her asking him to do something? Yeah, he loved his mom, but now that she didn't have his dad to help her, Pete was always on call. She'd better not ask him to take Chuck out again. He wouldn't do it. He'd say, "Nope, sorry, I'm sick." He clicked on her text. "Hey, Pete, after school, could you swing by the butcher and pick up my order of pork chops?" He responded flatly, "Fine." She responded, "Thank you," with a heart emoji. Pete popped a wad of watermelon gum into his mouth and set off on his way to the butcher shop, which was a couple of blocks out of his way. He wanted to get his license, and that was the plan 6 months ago, before the divorce. But now everything seemed to have been forgotten. He finally arrived at Barney's butcher shop during a lull. No cars were parked in front, which was perfect, because he could get the order and get out fast. Pete pushed his way through the door. Sale prices were posted on the glass, and some old rock music was playing from the back. He walked to the display case of raw meats, scanning left, then right. "Hello?" he called out. "Yo, I got an order to pick up." There wasn't a bell to ring, so he stood around for another minute, waiting for someone to help him. When no one came, he'd about had it. He knocked on the glass counter a few times. "Hello?" Finally, he took matters into his own hands, walking behind the tall display case. "Hey, is anyone here or what?" On the other side of the case was a long butcher table with watery red liquid on it. The overpowering scent of meat and blood made his guts swish around again. The gum in his mouth turned sour. He put a hand to his stomach as if to ease it. "I will not blow chunks, I will not blow chunks," he thought. He looked around to distract himself, but all he saw were pictures of butchered animals. When he craned his head in another direction, he was surrounded by rows of lethal-looking knives and cleavers hanging above his head. A new wave of dizziness washed over him. He set his hand out for balance on the butcher table, felt the watery liquid on his fingertips, and broke out in a cold sweat. A huge meat cleaver slammed down on the wood, barely missing his wrist. Pete shot backward, protecting his hat against his chest, knocking into the display case with his pack. He gazed at the meat cleaver embedded in the wood. The handle vibrated in the air as if the force had been incredibly strong. His gaze whipped up toward the hanging tools. One empty hook was swaying slowly. The meat cleaver had fallen from the hook. Fallen? He didn't think something could fall so forcefully on its own. But what else could have happened? "Hey, what are you doing back here?" A stocky older man wearing a bloody apron waddled into the area, wiping his hands with a towel. "Employees only, can't you read the signs?" Pete pointed to the cleaver stuck in the butcher table. No, you can't be playing with my knives. You're trying to get me in trouble, kid? Health department will have my license. I spit it out. What's the matter? I didn't touch anything. It just fell. The old man narrowed his eyes. No way these knives fall from those hooks, kid. If that were the case, I'd be missing a lot more fingers than the ones I already cut off. The old man raised his left hand to show a missing pinky and ring finger, with the top lopped off. The skin looked smooth on the two oddly shaped finger stumps. When Pete started to shake, the man laughed. "Scared? Never seen someone with missing fingers before? Well, keep your hands and fingers away from sharp objects, kid, and you should be just fine." "Maybe." He cracked up again. Pete swallowed hard. "Just here to pick up an order for Dinglewood." The butcher waved a hand toward the back room. "Yeah, I got that in the fridge. Chops, right? I'll be right with you." Pete whipped open the front door to his house and slammed it as soon as he had stormed through. He tossed his pack on the floor and strode to the kitchen, where he opened the fridge, threw the chops in, and grabbed a soda. He shut the door with his hip and chugged the whole can. The cola soothed his throat, and the sweetness calmed him a little. What a freaky day. He took off his cap and ran his hand over his head. He just needed to eat, rest, and forget about everything else. No more crazy dreams or weird kids with scalpels, and definitely no more butcher shops. His mom was going to have to pick up the meat herself from now on. He glanced out the kitchen window when he heard the backyard gate creak open. Chuck pushed his bike in and leaned it on the side of the house before coming through the side door. Pete felt his irritation bubble up. "Are you crazy?" he asked Chuck. "If Mom finds out you biked to school—" "Someone hogged the bathroom this morning and I was late for the bus. And I didn't pick you up, I'm busted. I won't tell." "Yeah, right, you always snitch." Chuck rolled his eyes. "I didn't tell her about you forcing me into the maintenance room, did I?" "Not yet, but I saw how you wanted to tell her last night at dinner. You thought you were real funny." Chuck held up his hands in exasperation. "Well, I didn't. That has to count for something." Pete shrugged. "Still, you can't be trusted." "Fine, I should just tell her to get you busted. How about that?" "See, you are a snitch." "Shut up, you are." "You shut up, you little twerp." Chuck gave in. "Whatever, jerkwad," he muttered. He grabbed a loaf of bread from the bread box, then the peanut butter from the pantry, then the jelly from the fridge. He pulled a butter knife from the drawer and started to make himself a sandwich. When he saw Pete eyeing his sandwich, he lifted his eyebrows. "What, you want one?" Pete hesitated. "Don't know." "Well, make your own." Pete held a hand to his stomach, debating if he could handle it. "You still sick or something?" Chuck wanted to know. He shrugged. "Just an off day." "Why, what happened?" Pete snapped. "Don't worry about it. None of your business." No freaking way would he tell anyone else about the embarrassing incident in bio class. Especially not to his twerp brother, who would run and tell Mom and freak her out. "Fine." Chuck finished making the sandwich and slid it across the counter to Pete. "A peace offering?" Pete lifted his eyebrows in surprise as Chuck began making another. "You know, Mom filled out that organ donor paperwork for us," Chuck said, like it was casual conversation. Pete's jaw dropped. "What? Why?" Chuck nodded, flashing his braces, looking almost pleased. "She said you'd come around to the idea eventually." "But I told her no." "Since when does Mom ever listen to what we want?" Chuck took a bite out of his sandwich and kept talking with his mouth full. "It's not a big deal, anyway. You're dead when they take your organs. Your life or soul or whatever is gone. Why do I care? Why do you even care so much?" Pete didn't even know where to start. Here he was, trying to save his body parts all day long, and his mom was trying to give them away. It's just a stupid idea. Chuck gave him a curious look. "Wait, you're scared, aren't you?" "No, shut up." "I looked it up. You want to know how they cut into you and take your organs? It's so cool. They split you open, like in a Y incision. Then your guts are all hanging out. Then they remove everything piece by piece." He made a face with his eyes rolled back and his tongue hanging out. Your intestines are like super long, right? So they just pull them out like a long rope of link sausage. Chuck made a motion with his hands like he was pulling out a long piece of rope from his stomach. I said to shut up. Pete grabbed the sandwich and fled to his room. The next morning, Pete sipped from his triple caffeine energy drink as he walked to school. The sun was out, which improved the walk a lot. Today had to be better than yesterday, he figured. Last night he had weird dreams again, but luckily the details drifted away as soon as he woke up. And there hadn't been any spewing his guts into the toilet, so that was a score. He'd barely spoken to his mom last night or this morning. Why had she signed him up as a donor when he told her not to do it so? He didn't even want to eat the pork chops he'd picked up all night. All they did was remind him that he'd nearly lost his hand. When he passed a construction site, he paused a moment. He looked across the street and decided against crossing with all the busy traffic. Instead, he'd go right under the scaffolding. Pete scanned the boards above him, making sure there weren't any weird tools that could fall on his head. He heard motorized saws and drills sounding from inside the site, but nothing coming from the scaffolding. When he figured he was safe, he relaxed a little. Just in case, he walked cautiously under the boards, with quick glances above him. One thing he learned recently was that he couldn't be too careful. As he neared the end of the scaffolding, he took a deep breath of relief. Piece of cake. From inside the site, he heard a funny buzz and then a harsh clank. The hairs on Pete's arms stood up. What the hell? Watch out! Someone shouted. Pete spotted something moving fast in his peripheral vision. His head turned in time to see a circular buzzsaw blade flying in his direction, reminding him of a flying frisbee with sharp teeth. His jaw went slack. His adrenaline spiked. He dove backward as the round blade flew through the air toward him. He held up his hand in defense like maybe he could catch it. Then he realized this was the worst thing to do and tried to pull his hand out of the path of the flying blade. He thought he was home free when he felt it slice into his flesh just above his wrist, followed by a sharp, stinging pain. He crashed to the ground, his drink pouring over him. Air gushed out of his lungs. His eyes were wide as he lifted his arm, watching in shock as blood poured down his skin. Oh man, kid, someone call 911. A construction worker walked to his side, grabbing onto his helmet as if not sure what to do with his hands. Let me get a clean rag, just don't move. The worker ran off, and other people started to gather around. Kid, are you okay? A man in a suit stood above Pete and leaned down. He had a phone to his ear. Hello? Yeah, there's been an accident. There's a teenager. He's bleeding on the arm. At a construction site on Willington and Salisbury. Hurry, please. Don't worry, kid. Help is on the way. Yes, he's conscious. Dazed, Pete glanced at the open gash in his arm. It wasn't very deep, but he could have died. Pete, Mom yelled as soon as she stepped into the house. Pete! In my room, he called out. He was lying on his bed, staring at the ceiling. After the paramedic bandaged him up at the construction site, he called his mom and walked back home. He didn't even want to wait for a ride. He wanted to get as far away from the construction site as possible. Now his energy was spent. He'd noticed his back was sore, so he'd gone to the bathroom and lifted his shirt in front of the mirror. As if his sliced arm wasn't bad enough, he also had a bunch of fresh scratches on his back from falling on the sidewalk. Yesterday he had a couple of close calls, but this late accident was more dangerous. This time there was actual blood. Mom swept into his bedroom in a flurry of nerves. Oh my gosh, oh my baby! Pete sighed. Mom, I'm okay, it's just a small wound. I didn't need stitches. Everything's fine. She grabbed his hand, scanning the bandage on his arm. How did this happen? She felt his cheek, ran a hand over his head, and gave him a kiss on his forehead. Pete looked at his arm and answered honestly. Don't know, really. Her eyes went wide. What do you mean you don't know? Were you paying attention? Was the construction work site being negligent? Do we need to call a lawyer? Maybe we should go to the hospital. No, okay, Mom? Just relax, jeez. While it was kind of nice to have all this attention on her for once, his anxiety was rising. No, I'm not relaxing. You could have really gotten hurt. She straightened and crossed her arms with a determined look on her face. That's it. You are not walking to school anymore. You can ride a bus or get a ride. Maybe I can change my schedule. I'll drive you and your brother to school. I think I can make it all work. Then she placed her hands on her hips as if she was suddenly Wonder Woman and there was nothing that could stop her. I will make it work. Mom, stop. It was just a freak accident, which he'd been having a lot of lately. There was a knock at the front door before it swung open. Pete shot up in his bed, startled. Who the hell's that? Pete, your language. Hello, anybody home? Bellowed a familiar voice. Pete stared at his mom accusingly. You called Dad? She said, Of course I called your father. Over here, Bill, in Pete's room. Quickly she started to pick up dirty clothes that were thrown on the floor. I have to call him when there's an emergency. Gosh, Pete, this room is a mess. Like that was anything new. Dad filled the doorway wearing cargo pants and a t-shirt, with his pocket vest and a floppy canvas hat. There was a forced smile buried under his scruffy beard. There's my boy. You were fishing? Mom asked him, surprised. No, not yet. I took the rest of the day off, making it an early weekend. I'm here to take my firstborn with me to the lake. How are you doing there, Pete? Let's see that arm. His dad stepped toward the bed, kicking water bottles as he went. His jaw hardened, but he didn't say anything about the mess. Pete raised his arm for his dad's inspection, unsure what to make of his visit. He hadn't seen his dad in a couple of months, only talked to him on the phone a few times. Suddenly he was home, like, really home. He hadn't been inside the house in nearly 6 months. It used to be so normal to have Mom and Dad home together, and now it felt super awkward. Dad made a humph sound. Doesn't look too bad. You'll be good as new before you know it. Yeah, well, I don't think I'm up to fishing today. In fact, he knew he wasn't up to it. He was sore and he wanted to lay down and go to sleep. Pete gave his mom a pleading look. Help me. She hesitated. He's tired, Bill. Maybe another time. It's been a crazy morning. And that's where we're going to have to leave it off for now. Sorry, guys. I'm going to get to the second part, hopefully as soon as possible. This is definitely really interesting so far, and I'm excited to get back to it. Thank you for watching, or listening, I guess, and I'll see you soon.